Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Family Treehouse, a podcast series brought to you by Storied, where I chat with people who have a passion for genealogy, storytelling, or both. I'm your host, Heather Haunert, and I'm starting today's show with a question. Have you ever wondered about your ancestors who fought in the Civil War or other 19th century conflicts? If so, today's guest is a person you need to know. Brian Rhinehart is an expert in military record retrieval and research at the National Archives, where he has retrieved and digitized hundreds of military files that simply aren't available online. And most of us don't even, I think so many young people think that, oh gosh, everything's online, but definitely not these records. If you haven't been to Brian's website, civilwarrecords.com, you definitely need to check it out. And in addition to all the research he does, he also has over 15 presentations scheduled now through October. He is a busy guy. So without further delay, let's welcome Brian Rhinehart. Welcome, Brian.
Thank you, Heather. I'm glad to be here. I'm looking forward to this.
Yeah, super excited to chat. And I know so many people that when I've worked with people, like Heather outside of Storied, this is like the first question that people always ask me is about Civil War records. And
Is that
do I
right?
have an
Okay,
ancestor? So excited to chat today.
good.
Um, so Brian, tell us a little bit about your background and how you got started in this fantastic field of family history and storytelling.
Yeah. So my very first time ever doing anything having to do with family history was I was in college, supposed to be writing a term paper, and I could be really good at procrastinating when I have things to do. I think most people are like that. So at this point, I kept hearing commercials for this new website out there called ancestry.com. So at that point, it was a fairly new website.
Yeah.
So I logged in for a free trial, supposed to be writing my college paper, but logged into this free trial, put a family name in there, and within like an hour, I was back census records into the 1800s and was
Yeah.
just thinking this is amazing that to track that my people from Ohio back into New England and New York. And it was just kind of amazing. I was hooked. And that was,
Yeah.
you know, 25 plus years ago, and I'm still going at it.
Yeah, yeah, I love it. I think we can all relate to that procrastinating and finding something more interesting to do.
Yes, some
Uh,
of my best ideas have come when I should have been doing something else. So,
yeah. And it's always that and what I love, my one of my favorite things about genealogy in general is just I love to go down those rabbit holes and they're so easy to fall
yep,
into.
yep, definitely.
Brian, tell us why you think storytelling is just such an important aspect of family history in general.
Oh yeah. Storytelling is what it's all about. So there, there's nothing wrong with collecting names and dates and filling in your family tree. If that's all you want, great, go for it. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you want to know who these people are, and if you want to help make sense of some of the background in your own parents and grandparents, these are the stories that you want to know. Who were the
Yeah.
people that raised them? What was their life like? I I have an example. My great grandmother. I knew her when I was really young, but she died when I
Mhm.
was young. One of the few things that I ever knew about my great grandmother was she was always known to be a heavy drinker. And
Uh-huh.
I was like, think as an adult, I'm like, of all the legacies to know about my great grandmother, this is it. But I'll tell you what, learning her story, finding out that she had a unplanned pregnancy when she was 15 years old, raised that
Mhm.
boy, he had polio and became disabled, a teenage mother.
Oh,
She had a brother who died in World War I from the flu epidemic. She had other
uh-huh.
family members who died in the flu epidemic. She had a son who died in World War II. So you know what? Part of me is like, you know what? If she became the heavy drinker, it makes sense. It
Yeah.
helps to put
Yeah.
context into some of these people's lives and the decisions that they made. That, man, she had a rough life.
Yeah.
So those are the stories that kind of put context to my great grandmother's life and help
Yeah.
make sense of the one of the few things that I knew of her was that.
Yeah.
The bigger picture and all that, though, I'll tell you what, is that I have a brother that older brother passed away about 20 years ago.
Mhm.
I had been doing family history for a while. and I had all the names and dates filled in, but I really didn't know much about these people. My older brother had a couple young children, and his 9-year-old son came to me, said, "What do you know about the Rhinehart family? Where did we come from?" And it just kind of occurred to me that my brother's not here to tell these stories now, but this
Yeah.
is something that I can do. I can tell these stories and help give my nieces and nephews some identity and some grounding in who they were. So I did the research, and I actually created a little family history book for my nephew where I'm going to tell these stories, the
Yeah.
good, the bad, let him learn from who we are. The last page in his book I have right in front of me, and I want to read a little bit too, read a
Yes,
section of
please
that to
do.
you. Because what I did in the book was I took the names of the ancestors, the dates they lived, if I had interesting information about them, wrote a little biography on each page. The very last page, I have his name at the top.
Oh,
And I said, this page is yours, Josh. It's mostly empty because your life is still beginning. And someday this page will be filled with your story. Every one of your ancestors before you made choices. Some were big choices, some were smaller choices. They had to choose whether to leave their country and come to America, start a new life, or stay where they were, whether to marry a certain person or not, how they were going to make a living, how many children they were going to have, whether they would learn from the lives of the people who had gone before them or try to make a better life for themselves and their family. And you too have a choice of what you're going to do with your life. What impact will you have on your world? What stories will be told about you someday long from now? And what are you going to do to make your life count? There's a little bit more, but that's the gist of it, is when you put it in the context of the stories, we are a story that's still a work in progress. And what will our
yes.
story be someday?
I love that. I think that so many times we do want to write about those ancestors and talk about them and learn their context for sure. But I think that it's important that we need to tell our stories too, because someday our stories are going to be that
Yes.
history. So
And we need to live our lives realizing someday we will be a story. And what
yes,
choices are we going to make that a good
yeah,
story?
yes, yeah, for
So,
sure. That was great. Thank you for sharing that.
yeah, thanks.
That was
Yeah,
super
thanks.
touching. Let's talk about I want to kind of do a little spin and focus today, Brian, on Civil War records and just
Yeah.
talking about that and their stories, because I think that so often when people kind of start the family history journey, that seems to me to be kind of like their starting goal. Like, I want to know, did I have somebody that was part of, the Civil War? So
Yeah.
let's talk about that a little bit. What kind of resources or tools do you suggest for people that are kind of just starting out that want to know if they've got someone that was part of the Civil War?
Okay. One of them has to do actually with the storytelling. So what I've learned is there's a lot of stories that over time from a couple hundred years ago, a lot of those have been forgotten over time.
Mhm.
Civil War service is one thing that tends to be remembered. Not
Mm.
every time.
Yes.
When I first started doing my family history, I asked my grandmother, what do you know about your family? One of the first things she's told me was that, oh, my great grandfather was in the Civil War.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
she still remembered that. And
Yes.
that's going to be the case for a lot of people. If you still have older generations above you, ask them, do you know if we had Civil War service in our background?
Yeah.
Um, check out any cousins that you find on Ancestry through your family trees. Sometimes these are the stories that get remembered. So that's a great starting point. I
Yeah.
would say also, what I usually tell people is check the obituaries and check the gravestones.
Mm.
Because again, the whole concept of the
Yeah.
stories, obituaries are just little tiny mini biographies of these people.
Yeah.
And Civil War service, a lot of times, would be in the obituary. I've seen
Yeah.
a lot of obituaries where there is not even listed the name of the wife or the children, but it's got the date of enlistment, the regiment number, and all that.
Yeah.
It was a big part of their story. So if you're curious, there's a lot of resources you can use, but those are some good starting points.
Yeah.
Ask around and check obituaries.
I also find, and I'm amazed by this, really. I'm a firm believer in the power of newspapers and the things that I can find in there. And I have definitely found, like you said with the obituary, that's a good one. But sometimes I've found where, early 1900s, there was I guess reunion would be the best way to describe it, where they have these
Mhm.
reunions of these Civil War
Yeah,
soldiers that are getting together and everybody's listed and who was there.
yeah,
So I
yeah,
definitely like newspapers too.
yeah.
So let's say that somebody knows this kind of information, knows kind of the basics, they have a Civil War ancestor. What would you suggest for somebody that wants to just dig deeper into that?
Okay. So you could start with some basic records. This is the question I get from people probably literally on a daily basis in my email.
Yeah.
They tell me, this is my Civil War person. What do I do next?
What's
So
next?
yeah. Um, the good news is there's some great resources out there that you can learn a lot about your soldier and his story. What I usually tell people is, let's start with the basic records. At the
Mhm.
National Archives in Washington, D.C., for Union soldiers, there are going to be a lot of times pension files for the
Yep.
soldiers.
Yes.
Those are when they applied for pension benefits later in life. And you could get some amazing information about their story, possibly some details that they were injured in the war. If they were married and the widow was applying, you might get information about the widow. You can get some really good details in these pension files. The average size of a pension file is about 100 pages long.
Yeah.
People are surprised to hear that. It's not just like
Yeah.
2 documents. You might get
Yes.
hundreds of pages all about
Yes.
your ancestor. So you definitely want to look into that. I would say look at the compiled military service records. Those are going to be going to tell you more information about his service, maybe what he was doing from month to month. Was he injured? Did he get transferred to a different regiment? Was he
Yeah.
injured? Did he desert? Was he killed? Some of those
Yeah.
some of those details are going to be in those service records.
Yeah.
And I would also suggest there's a record that I get for people all the time called the carded medical records.
Hmm.
Your ancestor was hospitalized. There should be a carded medical record for him
Okay.
detailing that. So, for example, I learned about one of my Civil War ancestors. He was hospitalized for a long time from sunstroke and from the measles. And so, yeah, he had a rough time. But without those medical cards, I wouldn't have known that part of his story in his Civil War
Yeah.
service. So
Yeah.
that's where I would tell people to start with, is look into those records first.
Yeah. The Yeah, I can't say enough about the pension files. I have a couple from my ancestors, and you're right, it's incredible. Like over 100
Yeah,
pages, and the information in them is just, I'm floored every time I look at
yeah,
it. It's amazing.
yeah.
It's amazing.
And some of it is
Um,
in his own handwriting too. You get to
yes.
hold these documents that he wrote
Yeah.
on. How cool is that?
Yeah, exactly. Or the
Yeah.
wife, or
Oh
it's,
yeah,
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 very,
yeah, yeah,
yeah. Yeah, and I love, and we didn't talk about this, I'm throwing this in here. I'm also thinking, you said if they had been, hospitalized and that carded medical, I've never heard of that before. So that's a good new tip for me. Um, I'm also thinking, what kind of records, I mean, this is an out of left field, Heather's asking this. What kind of records are there for ancestors that were maybe like my husband's grandfather, great great grandfather was in Andersonville. So what about like
yeah,
prison, the kind of
yeah.
prisoner of war type things? Are there any kind of records specific to those?
There could be. So in the compiled military service record, there should be an overview. If he was held prisoner of war, there'll be an overview. It should say when and where was he captured? What was the final outcome? Where was he being held? They got those records from prisoner of war record books that are at the National Archives, but they
Hmm.
transcribed all the relevant information into the service records. For Andersonville specifically, a lot of the
Yeah.
Andersonville records have been digitized and put onto ancestry.com.
Yeah.
There's not going to be like tons of detailed information about prisoner of war records. A lot of them are just going to be ledgers with the
Yeah.
name of the
Yeah.
person coming in and out.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
I wish there was more details, but um, a lot of times the official records don't have a whole lot of uh,
Yeah.
details in there.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Let's talk about, if you were gonna suggest to somebody, and maybe even focusing on Civil War ancestors, if you could give kind of 3 tips or suggestions or ideas of what to include if you're writing about those people, what would you suggest?
I would suggest if you want to write the Civil War story, it's going to vary from soldier to soldier. So it's hard to tell
Yeah.
you that this is the formula that you follow.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
I would say, like I said earlier, look at his pension file, look at his service records,
Yeah.
look at his medical cards. You're going to get some basic details there. If you want to go a little deeper and tell his story even more and get the rest of his story, I would say look at his regiment as a whole. Find
Oh,
out where
yeah.
was his regiment stationed. You might get a detail in the pension file that your ancestor was shot and injured in July of 1863. Okay, there's a story there. Where was his regiment in July of 1863? If his regiment was in Pennsylvania, that was the Battle of Gettysburg. So
Yeah.
now you've got a really good detail about that story to tell by digging a little deeper into where his regiment was.
Yeah.
I would say also one detail that kind of people don't really pay attention to a lot is how old was your soldier?
Hmm.
Because a 16-year-old soldier is going to have a whole different story than a 45-year-old soldier. You know, what was his life before the war? Why did he join the war? Did he get drafted? Did he volunteer for this? As a 16-year-old, was he running away from home and looking for adventure?
Yeah.
As a 40-year-old, was he just trying to get some extra bounty pay and help support his family by
Yeah.
joining the war? His age is a really overlooked clue in his story to tell. So make sure
Yeah.
you pay attention to that.
Yeah.
Um, there are records aren't used very often. They're called casualty lists, and these are at the
Yeah.
National Archives as well. That if you can pull the casualty list, if you know that your ancestor was injured in a battle, look at the casualty list. Well, there are a lot of other soldiers that were injured in
Yeah.
that same battle. So that tells you, like, okay, there was something going on. Were they running into the line of fire? That could be
Yeah.
a good detail. Pay attention to who those soldiers were that were injured. What do their pension files say about their injury? They were injured at the same place at the same time as your ancestor. You may get some details about the other soldier's story saying, we were running headlong into the line of fire and the
Yeah.
enemy was shooting at it. That was likely your ancestor's experience too. So pay
Right.
attention to other people around him.
Yeah. These are great, and I think that so many people get kind of laser focused on just telling kind of an just a generic overview of an ancestor.
Right.
So,
Right.
kind of having these other avenues to investigate and write about, I love that. I love the regiment idea. I think that's
Yeah.
fabulous. And age. That it made me
Yeah.
chuckle. My husband's grandfather, he I don't even remember, they had a boatload of kids. They were Catholic, Irish Catholic. So they had a bunch of kids, but it was funny because like during the Civil War, I mean, he was in and there were like a couple of times he came, home for it was whatever, and like had another kid. I'm like, so he just,
Yeah.
just came
Yeah.
home and then was back
Yeah.
off. So
Yeah.
yeah,
You know,
great stories.
one of my favorite things to do to help tell the story too is if you can, if you find out he was in a particular battle, see if you can go visit that battlefield. Because I've done this for soldiers that I was
Yeah.
researching, and it just totally changes my viewpoint because a lot of them have visitor centers. Go to the
Yes.
desk, tell them the name of the regiment and company you're looking at. They will be able to tell you on the map where that soldier was at, where that company was at. What were they doing during that battle? They have detailed records like that. You
Yeah.
can literally go walk your ancestors' footsteps on that battlefield, walking through the same woods that he did, knowing that he was running through here, getting shot at, and I'm walking these steps, and it totally opens your mind to what that experience was like by visiting that battlefield.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that 100%. We went to Andersonville and we lived
Yeah,
close to it. So we were down there and it is, I mean, it just puts a whole different perspective on your view of that ancestor. So
exactly. Yeah,
I love
yeah,
that. So I'm thinking here, you have 8 ancestors that were part of the Civil War, correct? Is that
yeah,
right?
yeah, Yeah.
So have you been to different battlefields for each of those or most of them or?
Not all of them were involved in big battles. And
Yeah,
so
yeah.
I've been able to, one of my ancestors was at the Battle of Gettysburg, and he was from Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania has a big monument on the battlefield because it was in Pennsylvania. He was a Pennsylvania soldier,
Yes.
where it's got a listing of all the soldiers that were involved. His name's on the monument. So I was able to go there and see his name.
Amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, that was really cool to see his name represented on that monument and know that he was on this battlefield. Um, yeah.
Wow.
One of them was involved in a battle. It was called the Battle of South Mountain, which is a lesser known battle. He got
Okay.
shot. He survived, got shot at that battle, but that was like a day or two before the Battle of Antietam, which is a
Mm-hmm.
major battle. So I've
Right.
been to the South Mountain does not have a visitor center or an open
Yeah.
battlefield, but I've
Yeah.
been to Antietam and I could look out in the distance and see the mountain and know that my ancestor was shot on that mountain and
Yeah.
survived. But as much as I can, I try to walk their footsteps, but not all of them were involved in the big battles.
Yeah. Yeah. That's incredible. Great advice. I love that. I encourage people to do that for sure. That's
Yeah.
amazing. This is always my favorite part of the show. I
Oh,
love for people to share a memory or surprising story that you've uncovered in your research or your favorite story that you have about an
yeah.
ancestor.
Yeah. Well, I just mentioned a minute ago about my ancestor who was shot on the Battle of South Mountain. I
Yeah.
found that out through his pension file. And he
Okay.
goes into detail. Well, it's his friend filling out an affidavit saying they were running up the
Thanks,
mountain in
Dave.
the middle of the battle. He was shot in the neck.
Oh
My
my
ancestor was rolling. It actually says he was tumbling down the mountain. His soldier buddy stopped him, picked him up, carried him down, took him into the hospital. They stopped the bleeding, saved his life. And so that's a detail that I wouldn't have known except for that pension file. But that's a cool story I mean, it's a shame for him, but he survived. It's a cool
Yeah.
story to know that my ancestor did that and he recovered and re-enlisted the very next day. So, um,
Oh my
yeah,
gosh.
he got discharged because he was just, they were like, you can
Yeah.
just go, but he's like, no, I'm going back. And he re-enlisted. So I also found one of my great uncles was in the Civil War and he unfortunately did not survive the war.
Hmm.
He was 19 years old and his pension file that his mother applied for had a couple letters in there that he had written to his mom. So I got to see his own words in his own handwriting, um, just saying how he hopes he can come home soon. It's really heartbreaking to read these. And the one detail that was just kind of stuck with me at the very end, he said, say hello to all of my friends and all the pretty girls back home, which like he was a very normal 19-year-old guy that had his mind
Yes.
elsewhere. He's in the middle of battle and he's like, I just want to see my friends and I want to see all the pretty girls that are back home. But it's just sad he didn't survive. But that helps put, details behind his identity that he didn't live long enough to get married or have kids. So
Yeah.
that's all there is that letter and his story in the war that but helps put detail to that.
Yeah.
Um, there are amazing stories about people's bravery in these pension files that you can learn.
Yeah.
Some Medal of Honor winners that you learned that they had bravery and ran into the line of fire. There's
Yeah.
good stories, heroic stories. I mean, it's a war. There's going to be a lot
Yeah.
of tragic stories. One story that I found, not involving my family, but I looked at the casualty list for, it was the Wisconsin regiment. I forget the regiment number, but it had a whole list of soldiers who were injured and killed in this battle. I mean, that's tragic enough as it is, but I looked at the date and it said April 9th, 1865, which I don't know if you know the significance of that date. That's the very same day that the Grant and Lee met and they signed the surrender
Yeah.
papers. It was
Yeah.
the beginning of the end of the Civil War. So while they were signing the surrender papers, this whole group of soldiers were killed in a battle on the very last day. And those are the
Ah,
sad stories that
yeah.
you just can't help but wonder which story made it home first to his family, that the war was ending or
Yeah.
that he was killed.
Yeah.
You just kind of
Yeah.
can't help but feel bad for just the whole culture around the uncertainty that was out there and the joy of
Yeah.
the war's over, but the next day you get a telegram that, by the
Yeah.
way, your husband died on that same day. It kind of
Yeah.
brings it all in perspective when you see stories like that.
Yeah. I I love this conversation that we are having, because I think if nothing else, this should be everybody's motivation to contact you so that they can find these
Yeah.
amazing pension files for, these ancestors. Because even if it's not some, you know, incredible heroic story, like you said, there are just little tidbits of that person that you're going to be able to
Yeah,
find in those files.
definitely. I'm not gonna lie, I've got the coolest job in the world. So I get to work with these records every day and help tell these stories. And I I'm so fortunate that this has worked out for me to be able to do this. So that's one of my favorite parts is
Yeah.
helping to tell the stories. I love being able the descendants to be able to learn about them, but I just feel like it's a way to honor these soldiers and the
Yeah.
sacrifice they made, that these stories have probably been forgotten, but playing a small role in honoring what they did and letting their great great
Yeah.
great granddaughter let them know that this is what your ancestor did. Look at this.
Yeah. And that's why stories are so important, so that we can just keep
Yes.
that going, and
Yep.
future generations,
Yeah.
can read and have access to those. I have one more question for you. And I know I saw this on your website, so I cheated a little bit, but I
Okay.
wanted to ask this because I think this is probably something that people ask a lot is, what about photos? Are there
Okay.
very many photos that you can find when you get a pension file?
No, there are not a whole lot of photos that you're going to find. And I don't blame anybody for asking. I have 8 direct ancestors who were in the Civil War in the Union Army.
Yeah.
I would love to find a photo of even just one of them, but
Yeah. Yeah.
I haven't.
Yeah.
Photos are not, so you got to think of it this way, that photography was a pretty new technology then.
Sure. Yeah.
It was time consuming and expensive. And we
Yeah.
were in the middle of a war that we
Yeah.
had to move quick and we didn't have a
Yeah.
lot of money. So the military and the government, they didn't take pictures of the soldiers or the
Yeah.
regiment. There are photos that are out there, but they're probably not going to be at the National Archives.
Yeah.
Occasionally you might get lucky. I compare it to Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. You know, the movie
The
where,
golden ticket.
yes, 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 you read my mind. Veruca Salt really, really wanted that golden ticket. So she had her dad get all those candy bars because they were hidden inside of candy bars scattered around the world. So her dad hired a bunch of people to just open up these candy bars around the clock. Eventually, they opened up a candy bar with a golden ticket. You probably see where I'm going with this. If
Yeah.
you open up enough Civil War pension files, eventually you'll find a photo.
Yeah.
I'll tell you what, though, very rarely will you ever find one of a man in uniform. It's
Yeah.
usually a
Yeah.
man later in life.
Yeah.
Maybe there was some kind of investigation. The pension bureau was thinking, I don't know if he really was in the war. They took a
Hmm.
photo, showed it around to his fellow soldiers. Do you recognize this man? That,
Yeah.
or maybe it was a uh, photo to document an injury that the soldier was claiming.
Oh.
And in order to
Oh.
become eligible for a pension based on an injury, they want some kind of proof. So maybe you'll
Yeah.
find a picture of a guy's leg.
Yeah.
You know, you may find it like something like that. But
Yeah.
unfortunately, I mean, I wish there were photos like that out there for these soldiers,
Yeah.
but no, you probably aren't going to find them at the National Archives.
Yeah. Yeah. That's where we have to use that AI technology to help us generate something interesting for
Yes,
those
yeah,
people.
yeah.
Uh, Well, Brian, thank you so much for spending time with me today. Your expertise is just fabulous, and I, encourage people to check out your website because it's wonderful. And I just feel honored that you spent time with me today. So thank you.
Well, I appreciate the invitation. I'm so glad to do this.
And that brings us to the end of this episode of the Family Treehouse, where we celebrate the power of storytelling and preserving our family legacies. Storied is more than just a platform for sharing stories. Dive into those historical records and newspapers, discovering the hidden gems that bring your ancestors to life. Add branches to your family tree, connecting the dots between generations. Thank you for joining us on this storytelling journey. Your stories matter, and through Storied, they have the power to resonate across time and touch the hearts of generations to come. Keep uncovering your family's history and keep the spirit of storytelling alive with Storied.